On April 19, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln issued a proclamation declaring a naval blockade of the states South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. This blockade was to prevent ships from entering or exiting the ports in those states. The blockade was part of the so-called Anaconda Plan. This was part of the U.S. strategy to defeat the Confederate States by cutting them off from foreign military supplies. Today we visit Fort Fisher State Historic Site, where the Confederates would go up against the largest amphibious assault in U.S. history and eventually fall to the United States.
Fort Fisher's main goal was to protect the lifeline of the Confederacy, which was Wilmington. You had the Wilmington-Weldon Railroad, which was the hub right there at Wilmington, and basically any supplies coming into Wilmington was shipped north to Lee's Army in Virginia. So most of the blockade runners were being built up in Scotland on the River Clyde, and so you had these Anglo-Confederate companies. So basically the British was backing it up, and the British were making lots of money off of the war, and so they were basically shipping in military goods, they were shipping in clothing and medicines, and then also just regular everyday goods like food.
With Fort Fisher, a bloodline for the Confederate efforts, surrounded by an armada of U.S. Navy warships, these blockade runners, these businessmen trying to earn a dangerous buck, had to outmaneuver by speed and accessibility in and out of the Cape Fear River and its shoaling inlets.
Let me show you. So we are up here. So this, in those days, was New Inlet. It was a second inlet into the Cape Fear River. So here's the one that's still to this day. This is the mouth. Yeah. But in those days, there was a second one, which made Fort Fisher. It's what made Wilmington great for blockade running, because the Union had to guard two entrances that were 45 miles apart because of Frying Pan Shoals. To get here to here is only 7 miles, but they had to go all the way around to get to it. So it made it really hard to defend.
One such daring blockade runner whose life was short but left with dynamic history was the Condor. A masterpiece of its time and only one of few triple-stacker blockade runners built, she ran aground on her maiden voyage in 1864 off Fort Fisher.
She was bringing back a Confederate spy, Rose O'Neal Greenhow. She was buried here in Wilmington. They buried her with military honors. She'd been caught spying in D.C., threatened with expulsion, went to Europe, was coming back from Europe on the Condor when she went down. And then she made the captain row her ashore, even though he's like, hey, you're safe here. We're under the guns at Fort Fisher. Wait until in the morning, we'll row you ashore. She was so scared of being hung by Lincoln, because he threatened her with it, that she made them put her in a boat. The boat overturned. She sank and died. And then they found her the next morning, and she had, beyond all the petticoats that made her way down, she had 150 gold sovereigns tied into her petticoats, bringing gold from a book sales that she had back into the Confederacy. And it unfortunately killed her.
Yeah,
no sinking.
No.
See, they're shallow. What people understand is when they say they ran aground or ran ashore, well, they couldn't. They had 10, 11 feet of draft, which means to hit 10 or 11 feet deep in the water, you're about 600 or 700 yards offshore. So what she did is she smashes in and comes to a halt. Stuff flying everywhere. Well, in those times, you had the Union outside, but you had the Confederate fort. Neither side wanted anybody to get their hands on the ship. So the next day, after the ship and crew got off, both sides shelled the ship so nobody could get what was in it. So the Confederates would send small boats out and try to get the cargo, while the Union vessels are shelling them, but they can't get that close because Fort Fisher is shelling them. So when they originally went down, they were coal. So a little bit, there's coal in the water, but it's not like they were fossil fuels like we have now. The oils and gasolines and diesels that you would find in a modern ship that goes down, or electrical or plastic. So they're not nearly as harmful for the environment as what would happen nowadays as a ship to sink. That same style ship for what it does, like the Liberty ships of World War II, they were not good for the environment when they went down. They were full of fuels and plastics and things like that, not good in the environment. But when these ships went down, they were still just metal and wood and steam and copper, and they're fueled by coal. So environment's a tremendous amount of fish, and they were basically an artificial reef now. especially they've been there 180 years now. And some of them are full size. Like the one we just found a couple months ago is 225 feet long, about 42 feet wide of scattered material. So it's a huge vegetation and natural habitat for fish, wildlife, everything that goes out there.
Yeah, so can you give me an example? During the Civil War, at least 31 steam and 22 sail blockade runners, as well as a wide assortment of Federal and Confederate military vessels were lost in the Cape Fear River area. All but one, which was lost in a collision, were stranded along the beach or along inlet shoals and sank in shallow waters. There is no other place in the entire world with as many shipwrecks in one region, making the area of the Cape Fear a natural historical site.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're coming to the Heritage Dive Park.
Okay.
That'd be the first one in North Carolina. Whereas the condor, she sits literally 780 yards from shore. If you know where the aquarium is down here, if you stood on top of it and looked straight out to sea, it sits 700 yards from right there.
Wow.
It's surrounded like 4 or 5 others, but the condor is well preserved. 220, in fact, that's her plans right there. That's how much ever was preserved. 220 feet long, the machinery is still there. So the 2 engines, the air pump, and then the cranks that go above it that ran to the paddle wheels are all still there, connected. It's the only ship we have like it.